Okay, we are live on YouTube.
We'll start, I guess, in about 30 seconds because I hear people coming in.
Yeah, I've let everyone in. I don't think Nan is on tonight, right? Didn't she say she was going to be late or something? Or am I thinking of someone else?
Joan, Dave Gerstenhaber.
Dave is on. He's on.
He is on. Okay. He thought he might be late. Okay, good.
But there, somebody else told me that they. Janine, did you talk to Nan? I don't see Kathy on here yet.
Nan and Kathy had emailed me maybe yesterday, and neither said they were going to miss the meeting. So I presume they would have told me.
Yes, just I'm trying to remember who it was.
Oh, well. Barry.
Barry
said he had a UDEL.
Yep.
Something at UDEL, and he may or may not be able to make the meeting.
Right. That's who it was. I knew there was someone.
So should we go ahead and get started even though Kathy's not on the meeting, or?
Well, okay, here she is. Let me let her in and then we can start.
Hey, Kathy, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Janine?
Good. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Is it okay to get started, Kathy?
Yeah, I apologize for being a minute late. I'm going to warn you, we've had intermittent disruptions with internet here at my house today. So
Okay.
it's going to warn you. Yeah, I mean, if everybody's here, Nan said she was going to be 30 minutes late, but if we've got most everybody else, let's roll.
Okay. So we are going to be reviewing 2 priority comp plan chapters tonight. We have a guest from Chester County Planning Commission with us tonight, Rachel Griffith, and she is our trail planner at CCPC. And she helped draft the to-dos under the action items and the extra material under the action items. And she's also put together some draft concept maps. So she's going to be helping to go through that chapter. And then we also have the resource protection as green infrastructure chapter. And as you can see at the end of the agenda, we have time for public comment, the last 15 minutes. And if you remember, after we go through each of these chapters, we also look at that implementation table, which is going to be in chapter 2 of the comp plan. And we go through and we try to prioritize the recommendations, the actions that you guys heard tonight. I actually, for tonight's meeting, took a shot at doing it myself because when we went through it last time, with the ag chapter, people weren't exactly sure how to do it. So I thought if I did it and assigned priorities, then at least you all would have something to react to, whether they're right or wrong or good or bad, at least it's some material to react to. So without further ado, let's move on to chapter 5, which is the trail and pedestrian circulation chapter. And just like we did with the ag chapter, we put the overall township vision at the beginning. This is not going to stay in the chapter. It's just for your reference in reviewing the chapter. We developed a goal, and the goal is based on all of the public feedback that we heard in the various processes we had done last year and then earlier this year. And so you're seeing the goal on the screen. Does anybody have any comments on the goal in blue? And if this sounds accurate for this topic area, remember this topic area is called trail and other pedestrian circulation connections. So this will be your walkways and your multi-use trails. That's the subject area. Hey, Chuck.
Hi. I don't see anything about connecting neighborhoods, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we add the connects parks, preserves? we sort of just put a caveat under other destinations because there's so many of them. There's the
Well-
ag land, there's the neighborhoods, but should we be spelling out what some of the other destinations are, or is it sufficient to say other destinations?
No, we talked at length about that simply walking to your neighbor's house was an important aspect of this. Probably, in my mind, it's the most important aspect of this, not destinations, or we can do destinations, but the overarching really is to be able to connect to each other in our township.
And everybody, as a refresher, every time we make a change, I highlight it in yellow so everybody's aware of what the change was. Does anybody else have any other comments on the goal? And if not, we will move into the community input. The community input goes over what the survey results were, and then also what the other feedback was that we had at the community workshop last year that was in September, I think. Then we did specialized subject area interviews with people. And then we also did a public meeting in January. So it takes into account all those facets. I had heard feedback from members of the task force that these two sentences were confusing. That's why they're in yellow, because I just wanted to let you know that I went through and changed up the wording a little bit to try to make them clearer. But the bottom line of the feedback was that trails are very important and these pedestrian connections are very important, mainly for recreational opportunities. And, definitely multi-use was a focus, not just walking and hiking, but people wanted to also be able to do some bicycle riding on the trails and, of course, equestrian activities on the trails. So does anybody have any questions about the community input section that need to be addressed at this point? And if not, we can move on to the next sections, which are the context. So the next two sections talk about the context and the existing conditions. The context is really looking at the county wide, and then also looking at the Southern Chester County region. And then we get into existing conditions, and that's where we're really looking at Franklin Township specifically. So we're drilling down, starting with what's happening, in the county. So we did a very, very 30,000 foot kind of overview of what's happening in the county in terms of connections, and listed some of the major trails, including the recent Southern Circuit Trail that Rachel has been leading up that project, and that I think some of you may have participated on. And then also getting into a little bit more what some of your neighbors have going on, including London, Britain, including Maryland, and including a little bit in Delaware. And then also this Mason-Dixon Trail, which really ties you with a lot of your neighboring communities through a trail system, and also a thematic interpretation concept.
I have a question about these trails. Are they described in other places so that people would know what they are? For example, I thought the Southern Circuit Trail was the same as the Mason-Dixon Trail, but they look like they're two separate things. Will these have hot links that will help people know what these things are? Or?
Well, when Rachel goes through the mapping, some of these will be identified on the maps. We can add hot links when we get down. That's a good point, Kathy. When we go down to we have the learn more section.
Yeah.
I'll put a note in there saying the trails that are in place that have, web links. We can add those web links so people can learn more.
That would be nice. Yep.
Okay, thank you for the comment. I'm not going to make you all dizzy by scrolling quickly. We'll do that at the very end when we get to the resource section. So then existing conditions. So we looked at Franklin Township, and so what are the major trail situations basically going on in the township, and some of the connections that could be made, when we reference parks and preserves, as we were talking about in the goals section. What are some of these parks and preserves that we're talking about? We didn't go through every single one. We primarily focused on the ones that the township owns, and we primarily focused on the ones that have some form of, not entirely, but have some form of current trail access or potentially planned, access. So we reference, these 4 sites because they currently have trails on them. So we go through and do a little bit of descriptions about all of these before we move into the recommendations. Is there anything more you would like to see in this background description, or anything that we're missing, or anything that's here that's grossly inaccurate?
Once again, I think we're getting to trails and hiking, but I thought we were talking about, like I said, walking to the neighbor's house, Well,
these are existing conditions. So it didn't seem like there's many walkways and existing conditions that we would be referencing currently in place.
So then does it need to go into context?
Well, this is called existing conditions. So
Right,
this is what's on the ground, what's happening on the ground right now.
Right, but wasn't what context? You're saying context is also stating what's existing?
Context states what's existing in the region in general. Existing conditions are what has been constructed in Franklin Township right now. So if there have not been sidewalks and walkways constructed in Franklin Township right now, then they would not be considered existing, obviously, because they're not on the ground right now. That's where we get into them in the recommendations.
Okay.
Can I help? Although I think, Chuck, you have an interesting point. People are walking now. So while there isn't a formal pedestrian walkway in some of the developments, people do walk on the streets to get to each other's homes. So is there a way to recognize, that those pedestrian pathways that people are just doing in their neighborhoods?
Well, you could call it on street.
On street, yeah.
Yeah.
We did mention that later. We did mention that people are walking on roads later on in the recommendations when we talk about like the specifics.
But to Chuck's point, I think highlighting it here as an existing condition, the current state of affairs is that people will walk on the road to get to, yeah.
So we don't have to list specific roads. We can just say the current state of affairs is people will walk on roads to connect to neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Excuse me, and other destinations.
You
Is that
could
fair?
say development roads, because that's typically where people walk, is within the developments.
Right.
Janine, you've also left off Franklin Preserve, and there's trails through that. Is there a reason leaving that out of this list?
The only reason it was left out of the list is because we looked on the maps that had been produced on the website, and at least the maps didn't show any trails to date. But if there are trails, then we should definitely include those. If you can send that to me, Joan.
Well, I think Paul Overton, is working on that, right, Paul?
We don't have a map yet.
Okay.
But there
So
are
we're going to
trails.
say
There are-
add.
There are trails.
So add Franklin Preserve trails.
Yeah, in the EG section there. So there's a few grammar things in the first 2 sentences. Can we just highlight them?
Sure. Hold on one second. I just want to get this in. And then add Franklin trails, and then add reference to residents. So I just want to make sure we capture that. Okay, what are the,
In the second sentence, it says the Township Village Active Agricultural Township Park and 4 Township Preserve, singular.
okay. If we have these kind of typos, I would prefer if you just email them to me. Like if there's substantive comments, we'll do them, but I think we could spend all night doing typos. So if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, I'll forget them.
Okay. If they're substantive, like if we say not and it's supposed to be is, then definitely let's go over that. But okay, does anybody else have any comments on existing conditions? And if not, let's move on to recommendations and actions. And remember, everything that's in blue, these are the recommendations that we've already vetted and agreed to months ago. And then everything that is in this color blue, these are the actions that we've already agreed to and vetted months ago. What's new is the descriptive wording under why do this. And what's new are all these action steps under each action that you've agreed to. And just as a sampling, remember, we go through and identify what's an action and what's a to-do step, just so you're all, on the same page in terminology. So promote pedestrian connections. We wrote a description on why do this. Is this the description on why do this okay, or are changes needed to this description? And if I don't hear anything, I'm going to move on, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Kathy?
Yeah, just to give people a minute, because we did send it out, but I do have a question. So trails, trails is a very all-encompassing word. I think sometimes for some of these things, we might be willing to accept footpaths or maybe go back to the pedestrian path infrastructure. I don't know, trails makes it sound like a hiking kind of thing versus a linking, like a footpath linking one place to another, or a pedestrian path. Am I overthinking this, or?
She has them both in there. Yes.
Trails are growing more popular.
Oh, I'm in the blue. I was reading the blue. The blue.
Oh
says-
yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, like, why do this? Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I like that up in the blue. That's what's
Yeah.
making me
Yeah.
think we go.
I agree, Kathy.
Okay.
Trails is, yeah.
So it would be
trails
another
like
way.
hiking.
Would another way of writing it be something like trails or footpaths or pedestrian walkway? When you say him, her, you say trails/footpaths or trails/walkways.
Pedestrian connections.
Or pedestrian connections. That could be one thing too.
I think using all of them or many of them is a good thing.
Yeah, if you could just alternate them, that would be. I don't know. I don't know what the right way to do it is.
Thanks, Janine.
You could do
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Just
Yep.
trails just sounds so like Boy Scouty and that's a deliberate, I'm going to hike a trail, where
Yep.
a footpath is, I'm going to, walk this path to get to my neighbor's house or go to the village or.
Okay. Plus a trail sounds like it's expensive. Whereas a footpath would be just a beaten down.
Yeah.
If you think about it from that perspective, a footpath could just be a beaten down
Good point.
an area, not even mowed, just like a beaten down walking path. So.
And then I don't see in here, Janine, you had mentioned some activity happening on New Garden with regard to horses. So I see the reference to Fair Hill, but there's something else happening right over at New Garden.
What's that?
Okay, yeah, we can say it's positioning itself, and then we can say, and New Garden. This isn't phrased properly, but I'm just saying, and New Garden holds polo fields. Maybe something like active polo fields. And you guys are right in the middle of that, between, Fair Hill and then the New Garden polo fields.
And I thought you told me there was some group that was really discussing, connectivity between the polo fields and Fair Hill.
There is, and we get down to that, Kathy. Thank you for bringing it up. I've been actively working on that in the background for Franklin Township, and trying to figure out what's going on and seeing how Franklin can be involved in it because of the feedback we've gotten through the resident, the community outreach, is that these connections are very important. And it seemed like Franklin was maybe going to be left out of that when you're positioned right in the middle of all of it. So I've been talking to other people, and we'll go through those action items.
Great.
of what that is and what that means. And Rachel can explain a little bit more about that because she's been actively involved in that as well.
Very exciting. Great.
So
Thank you.
it's really exciting, actually. It's really cool stuff, and it will start to implement or it is already starting to implement your plan, you know, now without the plan even being entirely done. So it's super cool. So
I
then
think
our first,
Fair Hill is, Fair Hill is being, this paragraph talks about Fair Hill and horse and equine activity, but Fair Hill is a massive pedestrian and biking location. So I'd like to see that mentioned because it's not only about horses, it's
A good point.
our pedestrian and biking connections are.
is currently a, I was going to say Mecca, but I don't know if that's the right word. I'll just say it temporarily. For cycling. Something like that. I'll check on the wording, you know, but at least we have the concept down. Ah, keep messing that up. Okay, so the first action item that we had talked about was updating the current comp plan has a 2009 trail feasibility study. And we talked about updating that because it doesn't cover the entire township. And you guys already also have some of those trails in place. So in association with that action, hold on, I'm going to make it so you can see this better. I worked with Rachel and she worked on putting together some steps, some to-do steps or some support information. And she's going to talk a little bit about that support information now for us.
Sure. So based on the feasibility study that was done in 2009, it seemed to me that the missing piece was just a little bit more detail of each trail in terms of what type of facility it would be, because that has, you know, drastically different impacts on its role in the overall network, as well as how much it would cost to implement and the steps you would take to implement it. So I think that, you know, moving that 2009 study forward into a master plan would be the next step in order to really start implementing some of these. And through that process, you would probably identify some priority projects to start working on and identifying some funding sources or some partners to make those happen. And so as part of this comprehensive plan, we've created sort of a little bit of an update of that 2009 study. But I think that there's a lot of room to take a much deeper dive and to really refine some of the alignments. And like I said, sort of determine which routes are for bicycles and which are for pedestrians and which are for both and which are for horses and that sort of thing. And so that's sort of where that recommendation came from. Any thoughts on that? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, Rachel, this is Paul. It is, but sometimes we don't exactly know where the trail is going to be, you know, which street or which side of the road, or is it along the road or through a field? And so sometimes it's hard to estimate the cost of when you don't really know where exactly it's going to go.
Yeah, this would sort of hammer that out. Like you would probably, my guess is you would probably identify some priority projects throughout the process.
Yeah.
And then for those priority projects, you would really get into the nitty gritty to determine, you know, what side of the road do you need right of way, that sort of thing.
So with Paul's comment, does that mean it shouldn't say that it identifies specific alignments, or are we needing to change that wording, Paul?
I don't know. It just seems as these trails fall into place, it's maybe not exactly where we thought, but the point was to get from A to B, and we just we get there the way that's possible.
So how would you like us, I mean, what would be the way to change the wording, just so we have the concepts down here? So everybody's on the same page?
Which wording are you looking at? The first sentence there, the first paragraph?
Yeah, I mean, because it says identify specific alignments, rights of ways, needs, design standards, et cetera. And from what you're saying,
Yeah, maybe it's, what did she say, as the, tackle the priority ones or the possible ones, or
could we say conceptual alignments?
I think conceptual is what we have.
Okay. Conceptual is what you have in the current feasibility study.
Yeah.
Now, the current feasibility study doesn't cover everything, right? And certainly it doesn't cover, I mean, obviously it doesn't cover everything you've done since then. So
Right.
should we just leave this worded as is then, or?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I know what you mean though, Paul. And, having a plan in place will help identify a path forward. And maybe it ends up being that path and maybe it doesn't, because like you said, opportunities do arise. But it does help, provide a little bit of a roadmap if you're going to start, tackling these projects really intentionally. And, we really want to make this trail connection from X to Y. And, how are we going to get there in, when there aren't these opportunities arising, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to the next action then, if no one else has any comments.
I have I have a comment.
Okay.
It's critical that we understand how many of these connections, we're looking for a network. And the right of way is critical to that. We're going to need to start using a lot more of our right of ways, not necessarily to make sure that it connects for someone walking through our township, but we're trying to connect ourselves to ourselves. So I think that's a really important aspect of it. How are we going to connect, neighborhood A to neighborhood B to neighborhood C? Is that something we need to address here?
What's everybody else think?
I was kind of asking Rachel.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking everybody.
I think that that the trail map that we will go over does start to get at that by creating little connections between developments that are currently missing. But I think that wasn't the focus of the trail plan. But if that is a focus of the group, then I think that we can absolutely go back and add that sort of thing.
I believe, you guys can say I'm wrong, but I believe that is the focus of the group.
I think that's a great focus. We'll go back and add it.
So basically, something like connections between neighborhoods, something like that.
Yes.
Okay, good. So then we talked about for our next action to develop an official map. An official map is a very odd term, I realize, but under the municipality's planning code, it is a specific type of tool. It's not just saying you're developing a map that's official because it's adopted. It's a specific tool that basically through mapping and an ordinance alerts the community and any potential changes that happen on properties that the township as a whole, meaning the community, is interested in X, Y, or Z connections. or changes happening on those properties during a development or whatever process. So for example, if the feasibility study that Rachel was speaking about suggests there should be a trail connection on property X, and then some kind of change is proposed for property X, that official map would be a notation to the public at large that property X should in fact have that trail connection as part of whatever's happening on the property. And the township would get effectively a period of time to make that happen in the process of changing the property. So then Rachel can talk about the two specific steps that would happen for this official map to be developed.
Sure. So the first one just kind of talks about official maps in general, and just like Janine said, how they can be used. And often we see in Chester County that they're used to identify future parkland or land that the township desires to preserve as open space. But almost as often we see them being used to identify trail corridors that the township is interested in developing. And so I think that, it might not be necessary or super effective to add all of the trails on your trail map to an official map, just because, kind of like Paul was saying earlier, some of the smaller trails might be a little bit more opportunistic and you don't want to sort of nail yourself into a certain alignment. But the trails where, you're only missing connections across a few properties and that property is going to change hands soon, it just gives you a little bit of extra leverage to have it on an official map, because it really shows that, this is the will of the community.
Does anybody have any comments or concerns or changes that need to be?
Is there any downside to an official map?
I don't know of any. I know that some communities are hesitant because sometimes when landowners see this trail going through their property, or their property being designated as land to be preserved, they perceive it as, well, what's going to happen to my land? Are you going to take this trail easement? But it really kind of goes into effect when the property changes hands.
Right. Okay.
I like the idea, especially from a planning board. It's nice to be able to see when we're reviewing a project that's something we're thinking about. So I like it.
And the thing about it too is, if you notice how it's worded, the right of first refusal. So if the township decides whatever's happening for whatever reason is not something the township can embark on that point at that time, it's not as if the township is absolutely obligated. It's more of we put this out there as something we're interested in, so let's talk about it further officially. Because it's it's on the table right now. So it's a good tool for that. So everybody's on the same page of where the township's headed. So moving on to the next action item. Work on obtaining easements to implement this multi-use trail and pedestrian walkway network. And we talked a good amount of about this last year and how that would work. And particularly during any land development application to talk about that. Rachel can talk about the three steps in getting to that.
Sure. So the first of which is that many of you probably know that when a piece of land gets placed under an agricultural conservation easement through the state, the state's Act 43 that governs that does not allow trails to cross that property. So what is often done is that a trail easement will be put on the property prior to the property being used for agriculture. So it's good to get in front of that and to identify the properties that, you know, might be good candidates for trail easements based on your trail map, and to try to seek trail easements through those properties that have not been preserved for agriculture, just so, you know, you don't block yourself off in the future. The second item is, I hope that some of you have seen the active transportation inventory that our office did. I think we sent out a summary to each municipality probably close to a year ago now. But we had basically gone through each municipality's zoning, subdivision, and official map ordinance, if you had one, and any other related plans, and sort of identified how well the ordinances promote the private sector building sidewalks, walkways, bike paths, things like that through the land development process. And so I revisited Franklin Townships, and what we found was that there, in terms of the requirement of sidewalks, there's discretionary language, like the Board of Supervisors, if they so choose, can require sidewalks in a certain area. They are required in traditional neighborhood developments. But and I totally understand why it is that way, because in plenty of places in Franklin Township, sidewalks aren't appropriate. But it might be valuable to have sort of like maybe desired sidewalk locations on an official map, or on a bicycle pedestrian map that's incorporated as part of your comp plan, or a pedestrian circulation map. And then have the zoning or saldo refer to that map and say sidewalks should be incorporated where shown on the pedestrian circulation map, or something like that. And then the third is to, we often see that zoning or subdivision ordinances require that if a development is going in adjacent to an existing trail, or if it's going onto a property where there's sort of this unofficial trail that people use, to have a requirement that the developer either connect to that existing trail if it's offsite, or to either preserve or relocate the trail on site.
Thanks, Rachel. Does anybody have any questions or comments about these 3 steps?
I have a question on 2 of them. The first one, so does that apply to the right-of-ways along roads under Act 43?
The right-of-ways are excluded because they're not part of the property.
Okay.
But oftentimes there is an excluded zone, a zone that's excluded from the easement. And oftentimes those are sort of a setback from the rights of way.
Okay. All right. And I would kind of like to see the second item be a recommendation to make a modification to what our current saldo and zoning say about sidewalks. We push it aside so often that I don't know it's even defensible anymore.
But Chuck, I'm confused by the second one. We do have a sidewalk requirement for developments, right?
We do. But what I'm saying is that
we don't.
I'm saying that we do, but it's routinely pushed. We've said we don't typically require it so many times that I don't know that we would win in court if we required somebody to have it.
Other communities don't have it necessarily. If they want to promote a pedestrian circulation network, they do not have it at the discretion of anybody. They say a new development will have X, Y, and Z, whether it's sidewalks, whether it's footpaths, whether it's pathways, whether it's trails. It doesn't necessarily have to be sidewalks per se, but it's some pedestrian network, and they will require it, period. That's it. What Rachel's saying is how your current regulations are written is there's a caveat of at the discretion, which means it can be waived.
I understand. Yeah, that's true.
So I personally would like to see us move towards other terminology than sidewalks. And take out discretion too. Kind of so that it gives, in some sense, a little more latitude, that we don't just throw sidewalks in at every new development along the sides of roads, because we all walk on those anyways. Create paths along the perimeter of a development so that it connects other, to others. But I would, I guess my question is, can we make a recommendation here to modify, kind of like the last one says, amend?
So you're saying make this stronger.
I'm saying amend, instead of it just stating what we currently say. I would hope that we could say amend current zoning in Saldo. And then talk about pedestrian paths and remove discretion.
We'll still list what it currently says, just so
Mhm,
people have the
sure.
background information, but
Yep.
we'll change the wording to make it sound more like this wording, where it just says straight up amend. And then we'll spend a little bit of time, on the back end of this bullet point, just saying what it says currently. Would that be okay?
It's fine with me. Is it okay with everyone else?
Yeah.
Hey, Janine, I just want to touch upon one of Chuck's first questions about the first bullet point with Act 43. So when I first reviewed this, I didn't feel it was extremely necessary to put it in writing, but because it's such a long shot to do, but when the landowners are putting their property in ag preservation, say the trail easement is so far behind and they don't want to wait, and the timing just won't work out, and there's money on the line, or they need the money to put a new roof on the barn, whatever the situation is, they can put the area that they think will be a trail in an exclusion area, that it will be excluded from the easement. So that is an option, but it's such a, I don't know of many instances where it happens, but it can be done.
Thank you for adding that. I think that's generally captured
Yeah,
in here without getting into the specifics. Rachel, do you feel comfortable? We didn't get into that many details, but
yeah. When I reviewed it, I didn't feel like it was super necessary to add it, but I just wanted to throw it to the group just in case.
we could say trail easements or exception areas. I don't know.
Yeah,
Don't you have to have an easement though to have an exception area, or can you just have the exception area and the ag easement? I guess we can say or exception areas as part of the ag easement kind of thing. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
yeah. That's exactly what I was saying. Yeah, because you might think down the road, oh, we're not ready for the trail, but we know what property we want it to go through, and we want it to go probably on this part of the large farm. So putting it in an exception area allows you the flexibility to put the trail easement there later.
So just out of curiosity, we are stuck on the 3 big parcels that the ag easement went down and there's no trail that we really need. What would it take to amend Act 43? Like who is that?
I think it's in perpetuity. I don't believe that you can. It's kind of a one-shot deal.
There's
You would
people who
have
are
to-
trying to amend the act at the state legislature level, but it hasn't gotten any traction, and they've been working on it for a long time.
Yeah.
But there is a court. You can take it to court, which is like what PennDOT does if they need to widen a road or something. So it can be done. It's just definitely not easy, and you may not win in court.
Right. All right. Thanks.
Okay, moving on to the next action then. So here, Kathy's where we start to get into a little bit of the Mason-Dixon stuff. Coordinate with neighboring communities to link pedestrian circulation networks, etc. So Rachel will talk about the action items. And then Rachel, can you go into a little bit more detail for everybody on the Zoom also, just what this all means?
Sure, and you can help me fill in.
Okay, I will.
So the first action item is to form an official trails and sidewalks committee, or maybe just trails, pedestrian circulation, that sort of thing. Because if there's a group of people who are regularly meeting and just thinking about this, that's really how things get moved forward, I think. And so they can sort of be the ones who keep their eye on the township's trail map and, know which properties are changing hands and manage the easement processes and things like that. And also could potentially do things like trail maintenance or, have volunteer days or things like that, get people involved. And the second is to participate in regional initiatives. And so the main one that Janine alluded to earlier that is
Could
sort
I
of
stop you? I had a suggestion on the first one.
Sure.
Instead of trails and sidewalks, I would have suggested trails and pathways committee.
Sure.
Rather than pedestrian walkways. Because I
That has
think
a
we
nice
were
ring to
talking
it.
about broader than just pedestrian use.
Hey, Paul,
Yep.
don't you feel that the pro committee handles that now?
They do, but I like the idea of a specific one because, we focus on the park so much, it takes up all of our time. We haven't done anything about open space and connecting trails. We do a lot on the trails in the parks for sure. But if this was something that the subcommittee, like clearly Chuck has an interest in it, he could lead. And then,
But is this something that the PC could also be working on too, right? Would the planning commission be also someplace where we might want to put this?
It could be a subcommittee of the planning commission, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, there's we can figure out the details later. I think
Right,
the point
yeah.
is just put it out there that we need a group of concerned citizens interest in doing these sorts
Yeah,
of things.
you can figure out how to make it work later, depending on what
Yeah.
works best, but
Yep.
Okay, and so the second one is there's this regional initiative that is in its very early stages to connect the White Clay Creek Preserve and White Clay Creek State Park in Delaware with Fair Hill and all of the open spaces in between, and sort of make the area sort of greater than the sum of the parts, if you will, by also sort of adding an interpretive connection between them through their shared history as part of the Mason-Dixon line. And so there's this crazy idea that potentially this could be a national park. It's one of the biggest areas of open space between, is it DC and New York, Janine?
yeah, in the mid-Atlantic, in the entire
Yeah.
mid-Atlantic.
So it's very significant. It's got a ton of historic significance. And Joe Biden is the president, and he has say in these sorts of things, and this is in his, in his stomping ground. So there is a group including representatives from Franklin, London, Britain, and New Garden townships, as well as DCNR, and anybody from Maryland, Janine? I can't remember.
There will be people from Maryland and Delaware. There aren't right now. And then there's the National Park Service also.
Right. Who is also doing a study, which I think some of you are probably involved with, that's a little bit more targeted to developing a connection between White Clay Creek State Park and the Strawbridge property, which is now part of White Clay Creek Preserve State Park. So sort of like incorporating that study in with this one and really identifying really what's possible in terms of creating this as, one unified open space and destination.
And this could really tie in. I view this as tying in the chapter about Kimblesville as the agritourism and recreation kind of destination for the township. If this is done properly, Kimblesville could actually be that destination for this entire portion of this network, because there really isn't another village or another area within proximity to this network that is, is a village, and is like Kimblesville. So you could really take it up a notch and take that chapter we're going to talk about Kimblesville and not just have it be recreation and agritourism within Franklin Township itself, but looking at the polo fields in New Garden, how they're going to connect to the equestrian destination in Fair Hill. Fair Hill is aiming to have themselves be right after Kentucky, basically in equestrian events and as a equestrian center for the United States. So it's a pretty big deal of what you're backing up to. And then, of course, the White Clay Creek Preserve in London, Britain, and then the state park in Delaware that all connect together. And the history of the Mason-Dixon line and then the arc between Pennsylvania and Delaware is something that people have heard of throughout the United States. But when we were all talking about this project, we really couldn't believe that nobody's taken that history a step further and really discussed what it is and what it means throughout the centuries. And it's had different meanings throughout the centuries. But it's a huge interpretation possibility and just a cultural linkage. So it just has, definitely national implications, which is why Rachel mentioned the idea eventually of this having some kind of national presence. Right now, that's not the case, but it really has incredible potential. And everything you've talked about in this comprehensive plan, from ag preservation to agritourism to making sure that Franklin stays agricultural and helps the ag businesses, your recreation, your trail networks, trying to connect people together, trying to enhance that, trying to do some economic development in and around Kimblesville, preserve historic buildings. This ties it all together, if this could get off the ground. So it's really pretty cool and exciting. So just to kind of fill in that background a little bit. Does anybody have any questions?
No, but this is all very exciting. I think it's kind of like listening to the two of you, I feel like we're in the middle of a perfect storm here where we have a lot of opportunity here. And if this team can really focus and start acting on some of these items in the comprehensive plan, we can really make some significant changes here and some significant improvements in Franklin Township. So I'm very energized and excited about these prospects.
It's really cool. And
yeah,
you're positioned perfectly, both in terms of where you are with preservation, where we are in the comprehensive plan process, putting this policy in place, the physical location of Franklin. There's a lot of things that have come together, as you said, the perfect storm to really position you to take this next step. And this is just, it's an exciting step. I love it.
Yeah. I'm
cool.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm excited about this.
Dave, I agree. This makes us running for office all worth it. This is so exciting. It really is. Thank you.
So to all of this excitement, and it is, I do want to say it's nice to see Janine like so energized by this. Really cool. Rachel, we just met you, but Janine, I can see it clearly on your face. So what kind of breadcrumbs then do we, with all of this then coming at us potentially in this, beautiful possibilities, what kind of breadcrumbs do we put into here then, or in any of these chapters then that help us meet the, I don't want to say challenge, meet the hope, if you will, about this, beautiful destination that's maybe more than agritourism, it's this cultural, historical, maybe having a national park right in our backyard would be really exciting.
Well, we can definitely, bump up the wording of this to encompass more of what Rachel and I just said, if you would like us to, and get at, a little bit more of that.
I think that we should, just to raise awareness to anybody that would be reading this or looking. So let's turn this inside out. I could see people working on those other teams. Because it's the one that's the most exciting, I think, to all of us, the national park team. And they're cruising around on the internet looking for, what's in the immediate area. And they find this thing where we show an open and receptive, we put our arms out in our language here that says, hey, if you're going to set up a national park right in our backyard, please consider us. We're a good add-on to all of that. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not so much to tell us inside the township what to do. I could see there being tremendous benefits to putting it out there for other people looking to connect these things.
Definitely. And one of the things that I've been sort of working on conceptually, it isn't in here yet because it's super conceptual, is the concept of heritage interpretation and seeing if Franklin might be interested in the future in partnering with maybe London, Britain, and Newgarden to do a planning grant study to actually do a heritage interpretation plan for the area and maybe tie in Fairhill and somewhat of Delaware to sort of vet how Kimblesville would work into this bigger picture and more of the cultural resource aspects, how Kimblesville could work into the bigger picture and actually become like the heritage center for all of this. And then also brainstorming what the themes would be. Mason-Dixon, the Ark is a key theme, but you have agriculture as a theme as well. Your agricultural heritage, you have historic resources as a theme. So there's other themes going on in Franklin. Newgarden has themes, London, Britain has themes. And so you could come together and have that plan basically, kind of ready to go to address that portion of this bigger connectivity, picture. And if that plan were done in a more multifaceted approach, it could be a connectivity plan. And you could connect the heritage interpretation, the cultural resource aspects, and the actual physical connectivity. And I mean pedestrian, whether it's cycling, equestrian, hiking, etc. You could look at those connections in some level of detail. And we're already doing that in other parts of the county. And I'm working on that and developing a sort of a model for how that could happen. So we could further bump up this recommendation if you want us to pass partnering and say, investigate, taking this next step if you're all interested in that.
What I heard from your question, Kathy, was sort of like when all those cities were trying to attract Amazon, like what were they pitching? What were they saying that they had? Right. And, or like if you're trying to attract the Olympics or something like that. And I think that those things would come out of this study that I mentioned, that Franklin and Newgarden and London, Britain would do. I don't know the answers to those, but I suspect that you're right, that there are things that might play into that decision.
I agree.
But I also think the main driver is going to be like the significance of the area that you're designating, both from a historic and a natural perspective.
Completely agree with what Rachel said, and the ag perspective too, that you can add on top of the historic and natural. You have the big three that are attractive to people.
It's a double-edged sword because traffic will become huge. I like to think of us as a hidden gem, and I like being that hidden gem. We won't be a hidden gem anymore. So we have a lot of stuff to think about.
I agree, Chuck. Yeah, as I was saying it, I was like, that might not be the attention we want to attract. But
yeah, but we're no Grand Canyon people. There's 50 national parks that you don't even know about,
Yeah.
If they can encompass and preserve more land, then I'm all for it. Right.
Well, see how much
Wait,
of this.
wait, I think, are we wasting our time talking about this? Like,
Well, I think we're going to move on. So I
We're
think
moving on now.
adding further descriptive
We're
info,
adding the descriptive info and then we'll move on.
I think that's good.
Okay, so outreach materials to highlight opportunities for walking, hiking, biking, and other amenities.
So this first one's just pretty obvious, is just developing a map of where you can walk safely within the township and the destinations that you can get to. And you could, if this really becomes an amenity in your community, you could give it to local realtors to hand out to, convince people that they want to live in Franklin Township. Give it out to schools and community organizations to distribute. And also, it sounds like the pro board may already do this, but offering guided walks and hikes, because you may, have all these wonderful trails, and if people don't know about them, then, what good are they? And it also is a good way to attract volunteers as well to help keep up the trails.
Are there any comments, concerns? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next section.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the next major recommendation is to support the township parks and preserves. We have a little description on why do this. You can read and let us know if this description's okay. And if it is, then we'll move on to the first action item. Does anybody have any comments about the description? And we'll move on to the first action item. So we talked a lot about this during the public outreach process about wayfinding signage and how some people know where the park and preserves are, some people don't. And even once you get there, you're not really sure what you should do next. So this is about the wayfinding signage.
So, it's relatively easy and inexpensive to install wayfinding signage. It can be a Boy Scout project, or you can be as fancy as, hiring a designer to design the signs and then getting them custom fabricated. It just completely depends on what you're looking for. But having a comprehensive wayfinding plan, I would say, like, we're going to have mile markers every quarter mile, and we're going to have directional signage whenever there's a trail intersection, or we're going to have this type of sign whenever you enter a preserve. That sort of thing is really helpful to orienting visitors and, helping people feel more comfortable in the preserves and the parks. And it may also be valuable to work with neighboring townships on this, especially if you have trails that cross municipal boundaries, just because it can be kind of disorienting if the signs change, or even worse, if all of a sudden the signs stop and there's no signs on the other side of the municipal boundary. And then lastly, you probably have several of these, but informational kiosks at each entrance to a park or preserve can be really valuable as a way to orient visitors, maybe even share information about what's blooming or what birds you might see, and also to share emergency information and anything else that's important.
Does anybody have any comments or concerns about this, or should we move on?
this one's it's selfish, but so we would love to have one of those signboards in the front of the park, but I can never find someone who makes the ones that are nice and weather resistant. The ones I've seen are kind of crappy and don't last very long. But the ones I see that are, like some sort of plasticky material that's good resistance to weather. Do you know who makes them? Is there anybody local who makes that? Like, I'd be interested in any information you have on that.
I can talk to you about that, Paul, and Rachel probably can too.
Okay, well, send me some. I don't want to waste time here.
Okay.
It just reminded me that we need that.
Okay, email us to remind us.
All right.
I'd just like to say quickly that I'm all for this. I just spent a weekend in Sanibel Island, and they are very good with trails and all sorts of stuff. been going there for a long time. And when I was running, I was texting actually Paul Overton saying, hey, look at this sign, look at that sign, because they tell a little bit of a history of, why they're so preserved. They have things about the birds. They also have how long the trails are. And I find when I walk with friends, I don't really care. I walk to walk, but they want to say, oh, we want to do a 4.5-mile hike, or we want to do a 2-mile hike. So it's very important to have at the trailhead that this trail loop, if it's a loop, is 2.5 miles or whatever it is. So I'm all for this. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Nan. Next action, consider opportunities for nature education. And Rachel, take it away.
At some point, you may have a volunteer group who wants to do this for the township. But there's a lot of organizations that are already out there doing this, one of which is the Land Conservancy for Southern Chester County. You probably know that they have great programming, people of all ages, and also programming through the various parks that are around, the state parks. So, to get the word out about these programs, the township can also, cross promote these through newsletters or whatever other channels for communications you use. And then also, this is something that I think that there's not enough of, but safe access to water, whether it's a dedicated boat launch or just a little sort of natural beach area where you can get down there and play in the water. And maybe having some infrastructure for ADA accessible fishing piers, things like that. There's grant funding for things like that. And they're also just really valuable for, not just people with disabilities, but also people with little kids. And, if you're not as nature savvy, I guess, and don't really want to get your feet wet. So and one note we had was that, boating, having an opportunity for boating could really accentuate this whole recreation theme that's going on. So we were wondering if any of the water courses in Franklin could potentially have paddling access, not like motorboat, but for canoes or kayaks.
Stop me if I'm wrong, but we don't have too many water access points. We have an ADA fishing area in our park that's the Way Clay. But Paul, are there?
Yeah, that's true. We have a what's it called? An abutment.
Right, where you can, in a wheelchair, you can park and get down there.
But the stream is only like 8 inches deep there, so it's not really a great fishing hole, And then I would say there are no water courses that are paddleable, although there's spots where you'll maybe have 100 yards that's deep enough in the Bamshire Preserve, but nothing more than that.
Yeah.
So we should remove that then, the paddling?
I would. There's not too much paddling.
I
Right,
mean,
Joe?
you could sneak into a farmer's pond, but that's illegal. No, I don't know any of it.
Okay.
Am I missing anything?
I don't know of any either.
Yeah. I mean, there's some over the Big Elk, because there's the new land over there, but still the Big Elk's not very much deeper than White Clay in most spots. So no paddling, a little bit of fishing, but not too much.
Okay, thank you. Promote volunteer opportunities that focus on maintaining the parks and preserves.
So again, no need to reinvent the wheel. There are existing programs that you can encourage township residents to participate in just by promoting that the fact that these programs exist. One of which is Natural Land's Force of Nature program. And since they've got a preserve in Franklin, potentially these volunteers could, work in the preserve or work in Franklin's preserve. And then there's also a program through the Penn State Extension that Chester County runs our own little version of, and it's the Master Watershed Stewards program. And it teaches people about stream health and water quality and stream bank restoration, and encourages the the watershed stewards as they become to do restoration projects along stream corridors and bodies of water. So, you know, having township residents with this training under their belt can be really helpful. And then also, you know, if you've got these volunteers, it would be helpful to have like an ongoing list of projects that they can get involved with, because I know that oftentimes, you know, folks graduate from these programs and then are not sure what to do with their new training. So if you could sort of like pull them into something specific, I think that would be a great way to get people involved. Next, sorry, go ahead.
On the second one, the local hiking mountain bike clubs, we do have a relationship with a local mountain bike club, and they are the ones who created and maintain the trails in Franklin Preserve.
Perfect.
Yeah, they're doing really well.
So maybe this is continue to develop relationships?
Yeah, yeah.
And then the third, while Janine's talking, is just to capitalize on these existing holidays, I'll call them, but special days dedicated to volunteerism outside or just volunteerism in general, including Arbor Day, Earth Day, and Martin Luther King Day of Service. And, you know, using township communications, whether it's the newsletter or, you know, just the committees getting the word out there to their friends and neighbors to bring groups of people together on these particular days.
Are there any comments, or should we move on to the next action? So work with a local land conservancy on community sustainability demonstration projects.
So land conservancies sometimes do demonstration projects on public land, including their preserves, also sometimes on municipal properties. And such projects, if they're in a really visible spot that people walk by and they have signage, that's kind of the critical part. Otherwise, people can just sort of walk by and not notice them. Really show how low impact and sustainable landscape design can work in an attractive way, because sometimes people hear meadow and they think like field of weeds, or they hear rain garden and they think mosquito pit. And you can really show that, you know, there's really nice ways to install this kind of infrastructure. And then also helping to promote the Catch the Rain program that is offered to, I know, people in the White Clay Creek watershed, and also I think in the whole Brandywine Creek watershed, which offers free consultation to private landowners to help catch the rain through green infrastructure. And also to identify township parks and preserves that can be farmed with seasonal and rotating crops by local farmers, and having lease agreements with farmers.
Are there any questions on the to-do steps, the background information? And if not, we're going to move on to our next recommendation, and that is this engaging in regional coordination. The why do this? Went too far. Are there any corrections or changes to the why do this wording? And remember, we're going to be talking about on-road cycling in one of the other chapters, the road chapter. You all had agreed to do that. So this is more talking about cycling in more of an off-road capacity. And if there's no comments or concerns, we're going to move on to the action item, which is work with neighboring municipalities. Whoa. We just crossed this out because we had too many work-ons. To complete a more interconnected regional pedestrian network.
And this is a little bit of a repeat from what's already been discussed, but this involves participation in that collaborative effort that we talked about earlier to sort of think about the open space around the state line as a unified thing, and what that could mean. And also working with the neighboring municipalities on wayfinding and connecting local amenities with signage. And then lastly, to have a coordinated, interconnected regional trail network that includes as themes agritourism and heritage tourism. And so making sure that those elements are included both as design elements and in terms of where the actual network itself goes, making sure that that's a central theme of the network overall.
Any questions or concerns or comments on these items? And so we'll move on to the next action item. And this is the last one for this chapter. So provide the identified transportation projects to ccpc for inclusion on the transportation improvement inventory.
You've all probably talked about what the transportation improvement inventory is, but just in case you forget, yet another acronym. It's a process we go through every 2 years to reach out to municipalities to identify their sort of transportation project wish list. And then we keep a running total of all those projects, including how much we think they're going to cost, or if the municipality has a cost estimate. And then the transportation funding that comes from the federal level that's distributed amongst the counties in the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission Metropolitan Regional Planning Area. That list of priority projects informs what projects get federal funding, basically. But it's also good to just have a running list of what projects are valuable so you know what grants to go after and things like that. And so we also collect information on desired bicycle and pedestrian projects, but really more so from a transportation perspective. So these would be multi-use trails that are paved, off-road, or relatively flat. But also thinking about any road improvements that you take on in terms of their impact to safety for bicyclists or also pedestrians who are using the road. And really to approach roadway improvement projects with a complete streets mentality. So thinking, like I said, thinking about all the users who are going to be using that road, not just the cars, and thinking about what design elements could make that road safer for everyone.
Are there any comments or changes or additions needed to this section? And if not, we are finishing up this chapter then. We have the relationship to the township vision. And then I'm going to add the comment that Kathy made initially. Does anybody have any comments about the write-up on relationship to the township vision? And some of what Rachel was talking about, like the TII, that's here in this link, so you can learn more about it. The programs that she was talking about for the Land Conservancy's here, our trail planning's here. So a lot of what you heard, we have a lot of links in this chapter, and you note that towards the end of the links, we start to get into links for funding, and then we list what kind of funding it provides, construction or planning funds. So you can take advantage of those types of resources as well. And if there's no other questions or concerns, Kathy,
You have
sorry.
you have the link to the county and regional trails. Where will the township trail map be? Will it be in a link or like on the next page, or how does that work?
It'll be embedded in the plan. Rachel, do you want to share your screen and go through some of the maps you created quickly? Are you cool with that? Rachel has spent a good amount of time trying to map the most pertinent items for you all. And to answer your question, Paul, that will be in this, embedded into the chapter.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So yeah. Do you want me to stop share?
Okay, I started sharing. Can you all see my screen with the trail map? You might have to stop sharing then,
Yeah.
Janine.
There, I stopped.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, can you see my screen? Or do I need to
Yes.
start it again? Yes?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So this is a conceptual diagrammatic map of trail connections, because I think it's important to think about, the destinations you're trying to connect and, the overall network outside of the boundaries of the township as well. So this is sort of characterized based on the sort of the hierarchy of each trail, and the hierarchy relates to the kind of the importance or the number of people you expect to be on it, how it relates to the regional trail system, and the hierarchy can also relate to how the trail is designed and constructed. So trails that are in the top hierarchy might be a multi-use trail that is meant for bicyclists and pedestrians, is accessible to people with disabilities or people with strollers or all sorts of things, and is really becomes part of the regional trail system, and just has a higher degree of regional significance, I'll say. And then these smaller trails at the lower end of the hierarchy really provide local connections, like we were talking about earlier, connections between developments or getting people from their development to the park, or they may just be a beaten path, right? They're not necessarily like a big piece of infrastructure. So this may be something that you have to digest a little bit more to think about what should the hierarchy be. Because that would also play into a master plan for trails in terms of identifying priorities and also, what type of facility these are. Sorry if you can hear my cats, they're very hungry. So this is sort of the overall diagram, and I wanted to share that with you before I share the actual trail map, because I think this might be a little bit
Well, can you go back for a second?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think maybe showing Fair Hill. Oh, I guess it's green.
I do want it to be greener.
Yeah,
I haven't been able to get their GIS yet to show the actual shape of it.
Same in the Delaware White Clay Creek State Park, Delaware side. It should be, show that that's a big destination.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments on this before I move on?
So, Chuck, when we think about our footpaths around communities and stuff like that, I'm looking up in the key here, footpaths that are possible here?
So those might even be like a detail that's not shown on this, that there may be an additional hierarchy that's, the sidewalks in a development, or footpaths if they're not sidewalks, that are sort of that hyper local connectivity. And this is just sort of like overall organizational, like how these trails connect with one another and to other trails outside of the township. But yes, those are still part of the network.
Yep.
So is this map the official map that we were talking about earlier?
No.
No. This is a conceptual map from a 30,000 foot view. So if somebody just wants to grab a quick idea of what Franklin's policy is, they would look at this map. The official map would get much more into the weeds about individual areas, as Rachel was just talking about, those specific connections on specific properties.
So the next map is, I think, what they're
Sure.
looking for.
Yeah, and you may choose not to put this in your comprehensive plan. And I thought it was a good way to just sort of show the connections that are trying to be made, and sort of the hierarchy of those connections. So this is the more detailed map, and this is basically an adjustment of the 2009 feasibility study. Some things had already been built, or some things, were less desirable, like trails along roads, especially busy roads. So I'll give you the highlights. Let's start with the key, so you know what you're looking at. The green is the proposed trails, and then the stars are destinations, not including the development. So these are, the daycare center, the wineries, and other places that people might get in their car and drive to, really, within the township. And also just on the edges of the township, we included those as well. And then we're also showing the existing trails that are just outside the township, as well as within the township. Those are purple. And then something that we worked closely with Paul Overton on this, and he talked about, if equestrian activity is something that's important to the township and something that you really want to amplify and have that be a selling feature, that maybe having these connected paths that are maybe more private in nature for use by the people with the horse farms that aren't really official township trails or anything like that, but might be suggested to homeowners, basically. And then the rest of the colors are different types of preserved open space. And so the black ones are the preserved farms, and they're black because trails can't go there. So now I'm going to zoom back out a little bit, and it's sort of related to the diagram that I showed. There is a trail, this green line, that most of this already exists, that connects the White Clay Creek Preserve down to Fair Hill. But you'll see this kind of bypasses Franklin. So I think that London Britain is working on a connection. I think that they have a trail easement through one of these agricultural properties, and that there may be a connection that could be possible this way. Paul, you would probably know more about than I do.
Well, I see it on their map, but I don't know how far they got on it.
Okay.
It would enter at Nickel Park.
Right over here, yeah. So the idea would be that connection is pretty important, and could have regional significance. And then also creating this northern route up through the Strawbridge property or the state park to connect to Peacedale and really make those two part of the same thing almost. And also connect to, this is the Ford Farm. This doesn't have labels, and it should. And then from there, that sort of everything connects in Kemblesville, and that it's sort of a hub, if you will, and that you can get to the farm park, you can get to Peacedale, you can get to the wineries, you can get to remind me at Crossan Park, and you can also get down here to the state park. So really adding, really focusing your connectivity efforts right in the Kemblesville area. I will say that we are still hoping to get right-of-way information from PennDOT for their 896 project that they've been working on. Haven't gotten it yet. And so that's kind of a critical piece to what's possible in Kemblesville itself. And we're hoping to have that in time for you to review the Kemblesville connectivity chapter, the village chapter. But this part might be in flux based on what we get from them. And then up here, this is the Pico right-of-way, that there's a proposed trail that mostly goes through that corridor. And then this would be a semi-private trail this part of the trail that connects these horse farms to the park. And then this would be more of a public trail that connects up to this winery, and also to the open spaces on the northern side of the township, and then also up to the name of the park escapes me. Wonderful park in London Grove.
Goddard.
Goddard Park, right. And then this might be one of those, a lot of this is already in progress, one of those more local connections that, you know, is mostly used by the people who live in these developments to connect to the parks and to the trails in London Britton Township. So I expect you're going to want to sit with this, and we wanted to share it with you first at sort of this 30,000 foot view with how it fits in with the concept. And I am sure that you are going to have things that you want to adjust. And so feel free to reach out to me or Janine when you've had time to really take a look and sit with it.
Joan, why is Stoltz's purple? Aren't they black? Isn't that a county ag easement?
It is, and it is black, isn't it? I mean, what I'm looking
Yeah,
at.
they're black. I'm blue, Paul. See the blue, that's my farm.
No,
The
but
little purple piece behind me actually is, what?
they're dark purple, isn't it? Can you zoom in right in the middle?
Yeah,
I think it might be a product of the purple being overlaid on the black.
Oh. Yeah, okay.
Would it make sense to highlight our development roads as another key?
Sure. Yes.
It just gets really busy, Chuck.
Well, but that's how we're going to get that local connectivity.
Yeah.
Paul, can you work with Rachel on maybe that and how that should function on the map? Is that okay?
I thought Chuck was volunteering. That's what I heard.
Oh,
Sure.
No, I actually would like both of us to do it because,
okay.
you know, this is all my view here and I'm not the only one. I want someone else to have input.
Well, from what I heard, I think all of these little development roads would be highlighted, it sounds like, and that would just make it more apparent what the other connections were.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's two small missing ones we can put on here that we missed somehow.
Okay.
And Rachel, do you want to help? There's more trails that lead from the Strawbridge property into Fair Hill, and that Augustine Lane, it doesn't exist anymore. It only goes as far as the square.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's used to be a road, but Willie DuPont years ago shut it down.
Hmm.
I mean,
I
it's
don't know if
nice.
we're gonna-
It's nice because it's actually still there. If they would clear the trees out of it, it would be a wonderful trail, but it's got large caliber trees in it now. But I can, if you want, I can help by putting more in there because what you have is dotted lines. Actually, the one along Appleton Road exists. The one that goes back towards Augustine Lane exists. And then there's a couple others. My neighbor's been really good about doing trails back there.
Yeah, that's a good point because this kind of shows the desired trail network. And if part of it exists, we should be showing that differently.
The state of Pennsylvania doesn't view those trails, though. They kind of have turned their back on that piece of property. And so
they're trying, they're getting together on it.
They are?
Yeah, the woman who runs Ridley Creek State Park came down to view it and talk about a plan. She's new.
So Nan, you can provide that information directly to Rachel then?
Sure. If you send me a PDF that I can print out, then I'll just dot it, I'll put dotted lines on and kind of bring it where it should be.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yep.
The other thing about the black is it kind of makes it so that we can't see the Ford farm.
Yeah.
That we could do that on all the Ag East.
Along the road, you mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't, but yeah, it might be possible.
Yeah. I mean, there's no reason to take it off the list right off the bat.
How much right of way there is.
Yeah.
If it's
I
only
think
the
it's
30
black because Rachel was trying to say you can't put a trail through it. I think that was the
Yeah,
essence of it.
well, we could still show green along the road there.
But Janine and Rachel, I don't think you can put a trail on any property that has an easement on it. Like you can't put a trail on mine now, so shouldn't I be black too, even though I'm not in an ag easement?
Are you talking about just a conservation easement?
Yeah, you can't put an easement on an easement.
Right. It wouldn't be a trail easement per se. It might be an agreement. Actually, that's something I don't know if you can put a trail easement on top of a conservation easement.
I don't think so. Well, I don't know, years ago, because I've been eased for a long time now, but I recall that I was the first farm to go in and I didn't want to put a trail easement on there. Plus it would be like the sidewalk to nowhere.
You
So-
can alter you can alter a conservation easement for various
can?
reasons. And some of our conservancies, if they get funding, will work with a property owner to do that. It's the ag easements that you really can't alter.
Okay, all right, that's
The conservation easements are designed differently. It's a process and, it's money, but you can alter them for certain legitimate reasons, like a trail, or if you're trying to preserve a historic resource or those sorts of things that have cropped up after the fact that meet the essence of what the original easement was.
got it.
Then you can alter them. So
But difficult.
yeah, I mean, it's costly, but it's possible because I know organizations, some of the land trusts I've worked with have done it for this very reason.
Okay,
They've had to
All right.
make changes later. So it's not impossible, but the money would have to be taken into account. Rachel, do you have other maps to show as well, or?
These are the two main maps.
Okay. Then I want to ask Kathy, we're at 8:06 and at 8:15, according to the agenda, we opened this up to public comment. For the time between 8:06 and 8:15, do you want me to then go through my draft implementation prioritizations of these recommendations and just talk about that? Because we do not have time to do the whole next chapter, obviously, that was sent out.
Yeah, I mean, unless somebody has a better idea, I think that's the best what we could do to stay on time. If we could get a tour of the next chapter, everybody already has it. Well, so do we do one of these on each chapter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So-
just thought, well, the recommendations are fresh in your mind.
Let's
It would
do
be
it.
better to do it now than later because we can't start the other chapter. We'll do a quick tour of it. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll talk about what's next.
Yep, that sounds good. Unless somebody has a better idea, I can get on board with that.
Okay. So if you all remember from last meeting, there's 4 possibilities for prioritization of these recommendations. There's act on, which is basically the short term. The recommendation should be started within 2 years timeframe of the plan. That does not mean completed, it means started. Then there's the consider. The recommendation will be started within 3 to 5 years of the plan. Explore means it's something you're interested in and sometime during the 10-year timeframe of this plan, because under the municipalities planning code, this is a 10-year plan. Explore would be you look into the recommendation, and then ongoing means it's something that's either already happening or once it starts, it will continue to just happen on a regular basis and won't necessarily have a time frame. So moving on to that, we didn't fill them in for ag retention, so I'll go back and do that. I'm sorry if I'm making anybody dizzy. So we will come down to chapter 5 of the trail and other pedestrian connections. And so I only filled in the when. This is all already listed in the chapter. We just have to put it in here. So the first recommendation or the first action, update that trail feasibility study. I put it at that medium time frame, which is consider and start within the next 3 to 5 years, as I did with basically its partner recommendation, which would be develop the official map, which would happen right after you would do the trail feasibility study update. Does that sound like a reasonable expectation in terms of when?
I think so.
Okay. Work to obtain trail easements. That it has been an ongoing thing for you all. So I don't know that we need any other time frame for that. Coordinate neighboring communities on the linkages. That gets into the whole Mason-Dixon business that we talked about. So it seemed like that's going to be an activity that's going to be happening pretty soon in the future. So it seemed like that should be one within 2 years of the comp plan that you get started on. And then the developing outreach materials seemed to be more something that you would be working on, but you would need perhaps through this project, some of the information in place that you would get through this sort of plan before you could develop these outreach materials. They would seem to come afterwards, which would be the 3 to 5 year time frame. Does that seem reasonable?
I think we need to, I was trying to unmute. I think the first two need to go first and coordinate would be second, is my thing. I think we need a map before we start coordinating.
Okay, what does everybody else think? This project is gonna like start, I mean, if it gets off the ground, it's gonna start. So we just wanted to make sure that you were in a position to take advantage of it, as opposed to waiting for this study to happen, because this study could be another, year or two. So how do you, it's up to you guys though. How do you want to proceed with that?
Well, Janine, you might have already done it, but do you want to refresh our minds exactly what an official map is? Because it's more than just a map, isn't it?
Yes, after you do this trail feasibility study update, where you're starting to get into the weeds of what should go where. And remember Rachel was talking about the alignments, the specific alignments, and we had that whole conversation. Once you determine that and your priorities, then the recommendation was to put the priorities on this tool, which is a regulatory tool called an official map, where you would write an ordinance, you would create a map, you would transfer priority items from the trail feasibility study onto this map, and then you would adopt it. So the trail feasibility study in and of itself, even if you started it tomorrow, is probably at least a year time frame. And then the official map would probably be, another 6-month time frame if you would do that right after the comp plan is adopted.
And refresh my memory again, the official map can be used as a tool by the township when developers come in, correct?
Correct.
And explain how that happens to the group.
So when a development is proposed, and this could be a single building development, it could be a reuse of a building. It doesn't have to be a major subdivision or major land development. What happens is the developer sees that the township has basically called, we'll call it first dibs to make it an easy concept, on property X, saying when property X develops, the township would like a trail to go on that property. And then the developer is put on notice that the township is interested in having a trail on that property. And so either two things could happen. One is the township takes the initiative to work with the landowner and develop the trail on the property and get the easement in place. And or through the land development process, the township could say, you saw this on our official map, so we want to now make this happen through the land development process, and we're giving you notice. The second way I proposed is not really a straight up official map concept, but it is a way the official map can also be used to provide notice.
So to answer Chuck's suggestion, we probably do have to do it in the order in which you listed it. We'd have to come up with our concept plan first and then adopt the official map based on that, correct?
You would have to, yes, you would have to do this. This would basically be, you might want to do that as an A. So you might want to coordinate this action, developing your trail feasibility, and then this action, coordinate with the regional people so you don't get left out of this project, while you're doing this. And then after you have this business and this business lined up, then you adopt this, work on this very specific tool to put the tool in place. And then you'll also have materials, because you'll have done this and this. you'll have something to write about for your outreach. So that would seem a logical way to do it if you want to change this to A, leave that as A, and then have these follow. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Yep.
Okay. So then moving on to the next one, support the township reserves. It seemed like a pretty quick and straightforward thing to do would be to promote volunteer opportunities, and that would really help the parks and preserves. So that's why we took a shot at assigning it an A, to do that within the next 2 years. These concepts are a little bit more complicated and would require planning and also, some money. So starting the wayfinding project within 3 to 5 years of the comp plan seemed to be a realistic time frame to pull together the funds and the specifics that you would need for that. And then these are more interesting opportunities you could take advantage of, but maybe not something that would be one of the first tier priority concepts. And that's why they got an E, which was explore over the 10-year time frame of the comp plan. Does that seem reasonable? And that last but not least is this regional coordination. And again, the working with neighboring communities, this overlaps a little bit on the other action. I may take a shot when we do the final draft of the plan to just clean that up a little bit, because when we wrote these original actions, they seemed like they were going to be different things, but now I think they're overlapping a lot. So I don't think it's necessary to maybe have this same action repeat the other action. But nonetheless, we gave it the A because it does replicate the other action. And then this, Franklin Township has been providing the county information for the TII for years. So this would just be continuing to be an ongoing activity. And that seemed logical. Is that agreeable to you all?
Yes.
Okay. And then it is now, we're doing pretty well. It's 8:16. So if we can open it up to public comment for the last 15 minutes of the meeting to follow our agenda, we can do that. And then after that public comment, Kathy, you and I can maybe just lead the discussion on running through this chapter really quickly and just giving the framework for it. I don't want to miss the public comment and doing that. And then also what the next steps are.
Great.
So any public comment about what we've talked about tonight?
Yeah, this is John Auerbach. I guess I got a couple of comments. One about sidewalks. The saldo is written right now where the plan comes to the from the planning commission to the board, and the board makes a decision at that point whether you're going to require sidewalks and street lighting. Sometimes requiring the sidewalks is impractical, but I think it might be softer if the ordinance should say sidewalks are pathways. The pathways would give you an option that would be something softer and less intrusive, and the board might be more inclined to require pathways versus a hard sidewalk. Just general comment.
Good idea.
The other issue, I couldn't see the map that showed all the trails, but it did look like you had trails along roadways, and the neighborhoods are entirely suitable to walk on the roadway, but the feeder roads outside the neighborhoods are basically unsafe. So I don't think we ought to indicate a trail along a feeder roadway. The right of way is only 16 feet on each side, and the roadway's 18 or 20 feet. So there's not really much space to put a trail. In most cases, terrain limits you somewhere along the line. So I'm not sure that trails along roadways are appropriate. Just my comment.
So just real quick, I agree with you that there's a lot of roads in the township that would be a little frightening to walk or ride your bike along. And the 2009 plan indicated a whole bunch of trails along pretty busy roads. And after talking with Paul, a lot of those were omitted from this new plan. And also the trails are shown along the road because we didn't want to indicate which side of the road they would be on, but they wouldn't be like in the road. It would be within the right of way or potentially on adjacent property. So yes, I agree with you that most of them would be off the road.
You have to get adjacent property because the right of ways at most 6 feet wide. And if you go along most of the roadways, there are obstructions and terrain issues that just prevent it from going through. So you'd have to get some easement on adjacent land if you wanted to do that. The road would I was involved in those 2009 discussions, and I remember that discussion that they weren't particularly safe, and traffic's increased drastically since then, and the intensity of the drivers, and I'll call it not the best behavior, has also increased to make it less safe. So it's something you need to consider when you put one of those things on a roadway.
So John, this is Paul, we agree with you 100%. And like Rachel said, I tried to remove as many as I could from the roadways. But sometimes we just wanted to indicate a trail would be needed from A to B. And so we drew it along the road just as a placeholder, knowing that, you know, it would be unlikely to put it along that road. So we
Well, I couldn't see the map. It was too small, so I'm only making a general comment. So
well, we agree with you. You're right on, and we know that. And what we don't want is we don't want people to think just because there's a green dotted line, that's where a trail is going to go. That's not the intent. This is just showing a concept of where we might need to go from A to B. But like I said earlier, sometimes things come up, a piece of land goes up for sale, a developer comes in and we say, hey, let's put one here, and that accommodates that trail we wanted to put over on the other road. So it's just an indicator. It's not a plan set in stone.
But maybe it does warrant some text that goes with the map that says, you know, that this is all very conceptual and really just represents, you know, trying to get from one place to another.
Future trails are conceptual, right? Because there are some purple ones on there that are actually in place right now.
Yep.
One thing we didn't talk about, Rachel, was you put some stars on the map. We showed what might be points of interest, and we didn't really talk about them, but I'd like to hear the group's thoughts. We picked out points of interest like the ag tourism spots, the wineries, the school. You know, the more the better. So if we miss some points of interest, that'd be helpful. So
yeah, I think the other ones were the shopping center that's just outside the township boundaries in London, Britain, Nichols Park in London, Britain. I think the municipal building was the destination, and obviously Kimblesville and all the wineries around. Is there anything else? Anybody? Somewhere you get in your car and drive to within the township.
Landenberg store.
That's a new garden, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we can put it on the map.
Did you put the cider place over in Elk? Because you can walk through the Strawbridge property to get there.
Okay.
Strawbridge property.
that's a good one, Dan. I don't know if
And it's
on
a
the map,
Christmas
though.
tree. There's a Christmas tree farm there too. So Louisville.
Did I get them all? Landenberg store, cider, Christmas tree farm. Was there one more?
Yeah.
I think it was-
Say that's in Elk, in Louisville, actually. So it's Louisville. That's the destination. That's where the cider place and the Christmas tree farm is. They're both right there. Oh,
Uh-oh. Hold on. I got kicked off. I'll get back on. Will you guys continue to talk?
I mean, I don't know how far outside our borders you want to go. We could also do the Nature Center in Fairhill, which is kind of in the middle of Fairhill.
For these purposes, it's what's within walking and biking distance. I usually say 1 mile for walking and 5 miles for biking.
Yeah.
well, we'd have to take a measure and maybe further than that. I don't know. Rachel, all my friends want to walk 4 miles. We're in the country.
4
here.
miles on the way
West
back
Chester.
too?
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. Once you get there, you got to turn around.
Right.
Or do
Right.
a circle.
I don't know whether they mentioned it, but we got 3 local wineries in our township. They could certainly be destinations.
Yeah,
For
we've
sure.
we've got them marked, John. We got them.
I didn't hear the whole conversation, sorry.
Yep.
The only destination within a mile of me is a winery, so I guess it's not my fault if I'm drinking too much.
No, you've got 2 wineries, right? You've got Paradox and
Yes,
what's the other
you're right. That doesn't help my liver.
one?
I have a couple quick comments, if I may. Am I hearable? You know,
Yep.
yeah, okay, thanks. So, Janine, I had a question. I don't know if these are like standard headers, but when you're talking about context and existing conditions, it seemed to me that existing conditions, if I don't know if it's used over and over in each one of these, but something like local conditions or local situation might make it clearer how that exists in sort of interaction with the broader context, which is coming more from the county and the state. I also wanted to just mention that when you're talking about Fairhill as a bike and pedestrian mecca that's becoming a big horse place, it's really an existing bike, pedestrian, and equestrian destination that's being developed even more so as an equestrian facility. And Chuck, I really liked a lot of your comments about linking neighborhoods. And I would not worry too much about a Mason-Dixon national quote unquote park coming down the road, because it's likely to end up being something like a national historical park, like First State National Historical Park, which was recently created over in Delaware, and I think is in PA a little bit. And I don't know that those are really generating a lot of increased traffic. It's more a form of recognition for the area. And then Joan may know this better than I do, but I thought when you're talking about the catch the rain thing, that our township's actually been moderately involved in encouraging people to work with White Lake Creek to develop rain gardens, and there's been a lot of activity that way. So that may be more of a continue to do this sort of thing rather than to begin this sort of thing.
That's true. We've had that on our website, and quite a few Franklin Township residents have taken advantage of that.
Yeah, I thought I remembered.
Shane Morgan.
Yeah, Shane Morgan, thank you. Talking a lot about getting good participation from Franklin. So we've actually, we've been successful with that, and she seems happy with our participation. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
I have a question for you, Paul. Would you be interested in adding historic locations on this map?
Oh, only if there can be a destination. Like you can't put some, right? You don't want people walking up to someone's private residence thinking
Right.
something they can go see.
Yeah, it has to be publicly
This is-
accessible.
Right. This is going to be, I think, something like I've been involved a little bit in the sort of Mason-Dixon Art Corner, White Clay Creek discussions that Janine was talking about. And one of the things that's trying to do is integrate historical and cultural resources, in with the trails, sometimes by signage, that sort of thing. Obviously, I think that's important. I think it moves the trails, to something broader than just natural resources, which actually I think is really wonderful. My wife and I have been walking the park recently, and I think we saw examples of showy orchids. I think that's what they're called. Very low growing, rather interesting plant. There's clearly a lot there to see at all times of year in the park in terms of the natural beauty, but there could be ways we can talk about, historical aspects as well. But yeah, I think it's a good suggestion, Chuck. And I think that, that is, for example, a big aspect of the Mason-Dixon initiative that is actually starting up in parallel with this discussion on the planning commission. On the comprehensive planning task force.
So add that wording just to make sure we capture what we just talked about.
Oh, your house is pretty historic. You could sell lemonade off your front porch. We'll put you on the map.
Yeah, I have to figure out what the right pricing for lemonade is.
Are there any other public comments before we move on to run through the essence of the next chapter? Okay, so I'm just going to do the really quick overview. You all have this chapter already. We're talking about all aspects of resource protection, and we're talking about it as the original, basically, type of energy conservation sustainability. And remember, sustainability and climate resiliency is in your vision statement and how it can be used again and still as infrastructure. And so again, we have this goal to run through our background, which is the community input from the survey and the other outreach, and what that yielded, the context, and this is the county context, as well as getting into the regional context. Again, the existing conditions in Franklin, and this is where we actually start talking about the natural resources here themselves, meaning the biotic resources and the water resources. Then we talk about the open space and the parklands in the township. Then we talk about the historic resources in the township and just do a little overview. And then we get into the recommendations and the actions that you all have already selected. And then start to get into the details, in these bullet points of the action steps, including looking into your ordinances and just making some recommendations based on what's in your current ordinances and maybe how you might want to change that a little bit. So just going through this, the chapter is a little bit long, 11 pages, and that's because this chapter is really covering 3 different subject areas. It's covering historic resources, open space resources, natural resources, which all together form scenic resources. So it's really packing a lot into one chapter. And we will start with this chapter at the next meeting, and we'll do just what we did at this meeting. And then after we go through these recommendations and actions, we'll go through the prioritization in that other chapter of these actions. And then moving on to the next meeting, Kathy, maybe you want to chime in on this also. It seems that we're getting through reviewing one chapter a meeting. So I'm anticipating we're probably only going to get through the resource protection chapter at the next meeting. Our team will still go ahead and work on the next 2 chapters. And the next 2 chapters are the Kimballsville as a destination chapter. And then what I'm going to call generally the infrastructure chapter. And that's where we get to on-road cycling, roadway improvements, things like stormwater improvements. And then we also get to the energy conservation aspects of the township. And we're calling that grouping that as infrastructure. So how do you want to handle the next meeting, Kathy, knowing what we seem to have the ability to get through, for review wise? And by the way, I think it's really positive, these, the discussions we're having, there's a lot of really good input. And I think it's important that we get time to go through these chapters because this is going to be your policy and effectively your work program for the next 10 years. I just want to know what you think is the best path forward, Kathy.
I agree with you. I think that some of this, most of it has been really insightful, interesting. We don't want to miss those opportunities. I'm sorry, my dog. She doesn't want to go through the chapters like this. So, my apologies. I let somebody else, if anybody has an opinion, I think we'll just have to plow through the way it is. I'm just actively thinking how we could expedite the process, if at all, in upcoming meetings. I don't know, maybe those tables in the back with the AOCC, whatever ongoing, maybe that's something that we can work on independent, outside of the meeting. I don't know, I'm open to ideas so that we're efficient, but we still have time to cover the content. This next one, 11-page one, I can say with certainty, this one will require an entire meeting.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate that you will continue working on the other chapters. And maybe if we have an opportunity a longer period of time to preview them independently, gather some comments, maybe that will enable a faster review. I don't know.
Well, for this next one, you'll have a month. So you'll have a very long time.
Well, that's right. Exactly. So, maybe why don't we say we're going to do this chapter and be prepared to do one of the next 2 chapters, preferably if it's shorter, and make that a stretch goal. And we'll think about, ways that we can maybe make that more efficient.
Okay. The infrastructure chapter is probably not going to be, it's probably going to be the same length because we're dealing with so many different subject matters. Kimballsville, I would think, might be a shorter chapter because it's one subject matter. So maybe that's the natural one to do next, in preparation, because there's no way infrastructure, stormwater, roads, energy conservation, that's going to be a big one to get through.
Meeting too.
Well, so we'll focus on Kimballsville as the next chapter to send out then, in addition to you already having this chapter. And I want to mention, you've all been sent the maps numerous times. So we didn't send them again because we thought you were probably tired of being sent the maps for the natural resources. So you all have that. I mean, we've sent them, I think, at least twice before. So you would have those too.
Did you send the trail maps yet?
We did not send the trail maps deliberately because we felt they needed to be explained just because of the level of detail. And I think what might be nice is, if possible, for Nan, Chuck, Paul, and Rachel to get together and, if possible, and make some of the changes that were discussed. And then after that, we can email the trail maps out. I don't see any point emailing them out now without those changes being made.
Yeah.
So,
sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and email those out then, for next time around. We won't talk about them for next time around, but you'll at least have them. And I like this format of talking about the chapter and then taking about 15 minutes to run through the prioritization. It's really difficult to do the prioritization at the very end of the process after all the chapters are done, because none of it's fresh in your mind anymore. It's much easier and I think much more effective and just a better discussion to do it right after the chapter is discussed. So if that's okay with you all, I think it works better that way. So.
Yeah, I would prefer to do it that way.
And with that said, we're doing pretty well at 8:38, only 8 minutes over, so that's not too bad. Does anybody else have anything before we wrap it up? And this has been a really good meeting. Thank you for the great comments on the task force. Thank you for the great public feedback. It's really a good process, and I think you have some really, really good recommendations and, an exciting path forward.
And Janine, I'd just like to say, I'm sure Kathy would say it, but has technical issues right now. But you and Rachel did a great job on the chapters. They were really very clear. I really enjoyed reading them. They were great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Okay, good night, everybody. Great seeing you.
Good night.
Take care.
Right.
Thank you.